Escape from the Lost City of Arvandor. The city of Arvandor, cut off from the world, was once a bustling and thriving metropolis. The dwarfs who lived there were proud of their grand, underground cities, and their intricate network of tunnels and mines. They were renowned for their skill in crafting, particularly in metalworking, and their forges produced some of the finest weapons and armor in the land. The dwarfs were a close-knit community, and their bonds of friendship and alliance were strong. They were fiercely protective of their homes and resources, and their warriors were respected for their strength and endurance. However, after the cataclysm, everything changed. The city was lost in an illusionary realm and the inhabitants were trapped within it. The dwarfs found themselves in a distorted version of their home, surrounded by shimmering, ethereal buildings, and the familiar tunnels and mines were twisted and altered. They were cut off from the outside world and unable to communicate with anyone outside of the city. As time went on, the dwarfs of Arvandor began to adapt to their new reality. They found that they were able to manipulate the illusions of the city to an extent, creating new structures and buildings, and even shaping the landscape. They continued to mine for precious metals and gems, but the resources were scarce and hard to come by. They realized that their forges could not produce the same quality of weapons and armor as before, and their economy began to suffer. Despite the hardships, the dwarfs of Arvandor remained resilient and determined. They clung to the hope that one day, they would find a way to break free from the illusionary realm and return to the world they once knew. But as the years passed, that hope began to fade, and many came to accept that they would spend the rest of their lives trapped in this distorted version of their home. One of the many market squares in the city of Arvandor was a bustling and lively place. The square was surrounded by tall, shimmering buildings, and the cobblestone streets were crowded with dwarfs of all ages and professions. The market square was a hub of activity, where goods and services were bought and sold. One of the most popular stalls on the market square belonged to a dwarf blacksmith named Drogath. Drogath was well known for his skill in crafting weapons and armor, and his stall was always surrounded by customers. Drogath's weapons and armor were not as finely crafted as they were before the cataclysm, but they were still of high quality and were highly sought after by the dwarfs of the city. Another popular stall belonged to a dwarf named Griffiner, who sold a wide variety of precious gems and metals. Griffiner's goods were rare and hard to come by, as resources were scarce in the illusionary realm of Arvandor. Despite this, Griffiner's stall was always crowded, as the dwarfs of the city were willing to pay a high price for the precious materials. Another dwarf, named Kethril, sold potions and other alchemical items. Kethril's potions were not as effective as they were before the cataclysm, but still were useful for minor ailments and injuries. The market square was also home to several food vendors, such as a dwarf baker named Freya, who sold a variety of breads and pastries. Freya's baked goods were not as delicious as they were before, but they were still a welcome treat for the dwarfs of the city. Overall, the market square was a vital part of the city's economy, and it was a place where the dwarfs of Arvandor could come together to trade goods and services. Despite the hardships of living in an illusionary realm, the market square was a symbol of the dwarfs' resilience and determination to make the best of their situation. Kethril and Griffiner were both sitting at their stalls, enjoying a quiet moment in the market. They had been friends for years, and often spent their free time chatting and gossiping about the latest news and rumors in the city of Arvandor. "Have you heard about Drogath?" Griffiner said, leaning in closer to Kethril. "What about him?" Kethril asked, looking up from his potions. "I heard he's not a dwarf at all," Griffiner whispered. "He's a changeling. He infiltrated the city and has been posing as a blacksmith for years." Kethril's eyes widened in surprise. "Really? I had no idea. He's always seemed like a regular dwarf to me." "That's what they want you to think," Griffiner said, nodding. "But I heard he's been spotted using magic. He's not even trying to hide it anymore." "That's quite a serious accusation," Kethril said, stroking his beard thoughtfully. "I wonder why he would do that. What does he want? Maybe it's just a rumor. It's not fair to spread unfounded gossip." "I don't know," Griffiner said, shrugging. "But something's not right about him. I don't trust him. He's always been a little too good at finding rare and valuable materials for his weapons and armor. Where does he get them from?" "I have no idea," Kethril said. "But I'll keep an eye on him. If I see anything suspicious, I'll let you know." Thanks, Kethril, Gryphona said, patting his arm. I appreciate it. We have to stick together and watch out for each other in this city. Of course, Kethril said, giving her a reassuring smile. I'll let you know if I find out anything else. In the meantime, let's keep this between us. We don't want to start any unnecessary rumors or panic. Agreed, Gryphona said, nodding. But we should definitely be careful around him. He may be a changeling, but he's still a dangerous creature. We can't let our guard down. I'll keep that in mind, Kethril said, as he went back to his potions, feeling a sense of unease. He had never suspected that Drogath was not who he claimed to be, and it made him wonder what other secrets the city of Arvandor held. Kethril, being a concerned member of the community, was determined to find out more about Drogath and his true identity. So, he decided to follow Drogath on multiple evenings, in hopes of uncovering more information about him. On the first evening, Kethril set out to follow Drogath after he closed his blacksmith shop in the market square. He followed him through the winding streets of Arvandor, keeping a safe distance so as not to be noticed. However, as they reached the outskirts of the city, Drogath suddenly disappeared, and Kethril was unable to find him. On the second evening, Kethril decided to try a different approach. He followed Drogath to the entrance of a mine, but as soon as Drogath entered, he was engulfed by a dense fog that appeared out of nowhere, and Kethril lost sight of him. On the third evening, Kethril followed Drogath to the outskirts of the city, where he saw him entering a cave. He followed him inside, but as soon as he entered the cave, it was pitch black and he couldn't see a thing. He heard strange noises and felt like he was being watched, but he couldn't see anything and he had to retreat. Kethril was disappointed, as he had not been able to find out more about Drogath. He realized that Drogath was using some kind of magic to conceal his movements and escape detection. He also noticed that Drogath was very careful and always seemed to be one step ahead of him. Kethril realized that he would need to come up with a new plan if he wanted to uncover Drogath's true identity. The next day Kethril went to Freya's bakery, explaining his plan. Freya, he said, Drogath is up to something. I need your help to set up a surveillance. Will you help me? Freya was concerned for her community and agreed to help Kethril. Together, the two of them devised a plan to observe Drogath's movements and eventually discover his true intentions. Kethril and Freya worked diligently, gathering the ingredients for the special flour. They carefully measured out each ingredient, ensuring that the proportions were just right. When all of the ingredients were gathered, Kethril asked Freya to add a special ingredient, a rare powder that would make the flour glow in the dark. Freya complied, adding the powder into the mix. After they finished, Kethril took the bag of flour and said, "Now, let us go find Drogath. We must be sure he does not escape." With that, they set off, the glowing flour casting an eerie light as they ventured into the darkness of the cave. Kethril and Freya traveled to the cave, their hearts racing as they thought of what they might find. As they walked through the tunnels, they were cautious, alert for any sign of Drogath. The air was damp, and the walls were slick with moisture. They could hear a faint dripping in the distance, the only sound in the stillness of the cave. They eventually reached a large chamber, which seemed to be the center of the cave. Kethril spread some flour on the ground, creating a trail that would reveal any footprints that Drogath left behind. He and Freya searched the walls, looking for any clues that could lead them to the truth. Kethril and Freya waited inside the cave, their eyes darting around to catch any sign of Drogath's movement. Gryphona had warned them about his true identity, but they needed to be sure. Suddenly, Freya noticed something glinting in the darkness. She picked it up, and realized that it was an amulet, the amulet of illusionary crowds. Kethril and Freya exchanged a nervous glance. Could this be the weapon that caused the cataclysm so many years ago? Kethril gasped when he saw it, realizing the implications of what they had found. This is why Drogath was here, he said. He must have been looking for this. Kethril took the amulet from Freya and examined it closely. He knew that it was far too dangerous to leave in the wrong hands. He tucked it away safely and vowed to find a way to use it to free Arvandor from its prison of illusions. They waited for hours, but eventually, they saw a figure emerging into the cave. It was Drogath. They followed him discreetly, staying in the shadows and making sure not to alert him to their presence. Finally, they reached a spot where they could get a better look at him. Kethral and Freya could see now that Grithna had been right, Drogath was indeed a changeling. Kethral and Freya cautiously made their way through the cave, using the map they had created with the flower to track Drogath's movements. Suddenly, they heard a loud click followed by a rumbling sound coming from ahead of them. They looked up in horror as the ground beneath their feet began to give way. Kethral and Freya screamed and tried to grab onto something, anything, to keep them from falling. But it was too late. The trap had been sprung and they plummeted into the darkness below. When they finally stopped falling, they found themselves in a large chamber lit by an eerie green light. At the center of the chamber stood Drogath, his eyes glowing with a malicious glee. He had known about their presence all along and had set traps and alarms to prevent them from discovering his true identity. Kethral and Freya were now prisoners in his domain. Drogath stood before Kethral and Freya, his true form revealed. His eyes glowed an eerie green in the dim light of the cave. He explained that he had infiltrated the city years ago with the goal of finding powerful magical artifacts to use in his own dark rituals. He had been searching for the amulet of illusionary crowds ever since his arrival. I hoped I could use it to create a gateway between the illusionary realm and the real world, he said. But I never expected to find it in your hands. Kethral and Freya were stunned. They had not truly believed the idea Drogath was a changeling, or that he had infiltrated their city. But they understood why he had done it. He wanted to escape the illusionary realm and return to the real world. You can still leave, Freya said softly. We won't tell anyone your secret. Kethral and Freya looked at each other, unsure of what to do. Drogath spoke again, this time more urgently. I could leave the city peacefully in exchange for you not revealing my true identity, he said. But I must have your word that you will keep this a secret. Kethral and Freya were hesitant, but they eventually agreed. Drogath nodded in satisfaction and began gathering his belongings. He paused for a moment before turning around and looking Kethral and Freya in the eye. I hope you keep your word, he said gravely. Otherwise, I cannot guarantee the safety of Arvandor. Drogath studied the amulet for a long time, experimenting with its power. He finally figured out how to use it to create a gateway between the two realms. Kethral and Freya pleaded with Drogath to open the portal not just for them, but for all of the people trapped in the illusionary realm. Reluctantly, he agreed and began to cast a spell to open the gateway. Soon, a shimmering light shone in the darkness of the cave and the sound of rushing wind filled the air. With a wave of his hand, he activated the amulet and a shimmering portal appeared in front of them. Kethral, Freya, and Drogath stepped through the portal and were immediately transported back to the real world. Kethral, Freya, and Drogath managed to make it out of the city alive. Drogath was relieved when they emerged in the Silver Mountains far from the city, but his relief was short-lived as he realized that the amulet of illusionary crowds had been left behind. He tried to go back and retrieve it, but the portal leading back to the cave had collapsed. Drogath sighed, realizing that the powerful magical artifact would remain trapped in the illusionary realm forever. He looked at Kethral and Freya and said, I must leave now. I can no longer stay here. The amulet of illusionary crowds was still trapped in the city, but at least they were safe. As they watched Drogath fade away, Freya said, I'm glad we could help him find freedom. Kethral nodded in agreement. They turned and began their quest to help the lost city of Arvandor, hopeful that one day the city would be free from its illusionary prison.